Hello and welcome to Wild Old Times, a podcast about the curious and obscure corners of Ireland and Irish history. This week, we continue our journey through the history of Irish cinema. The first part of this series, we looked at films made in Ireland before independence. In the second part, we looked at films made in the Irish Free State. And now, after last episode's digression into wartime propaganda, we're going to look at how cinema fared in the new Republic of Ireland. As we've discussed in the past, in 1937, Ireland left the British Commonwealth and became a new, fully independent country called the Republic of Ireland. It's hard to overstate how much the Catholic Church dominated the first half-century of the Republic's history. Eamon de Valera, the Taoiseach who led in writing the new constitution, was both a fanatical Catholic and a staunch rejecter of progressive values. His vision for Ireland was of it being driven by Catholic beliefs. That was reflected in his constitution. But in addition to it including the Church's views on topics like contraception and divorce, there was also one part of it that would strike at the heart of Ireland's creative industries. Article 40 of the Constitution was its declaration of human rights, and among them was the right to freedom of expression. But this right was hedged around with restrictions and rules that fatally undermined it. Anything that challenged the morality or authority of the state was banned. In fact, the Constitution specifically said that publishing material like that had to be made a criminal offence. Thus, there was actually an obligation built into the Constitution compelling the government to censor its citizens, and it gleefully complied. This is not to suggest that censorship hadn't been applied before this, of course. In fact, it was in 1923 that the Censorship of Films Act was passed, giving the censorship board sweeping powers over film releases. These powers were used often, both to mandate cuts to films and to ban them outright. For example, both of the Universal movies Dracula and Frankenstein were cut for Irish audiences. The Marx Brothers movie Monkey Business was originally banned, but eventually released with cuts. And the 1932 version of Scarface was banned and remained banned for decades, one of 2,500 films that would be banned, while over 10,000 of cuts made to them. Sex and violence were the main reasons for a film to be rejected, of course. Like most censors of the time, they equated dancing with sex and any form of horror with violence. There were other cases where the Catholic morality showed more starkly. Divorce was a subject that had to be handled in line with church teachings, though it was permitted to exist in plots. In one farcical example, the 1940 American comedy I Want a Divorce, which is actually anti-divorce in its messaging, was made to change its name to The Tragedy of Divorce to make that more clear. But the real bugbear was birth control. As far as films viewable in Ireland were concerned, it did not exist. Neither did abortion or miscarriages, and in fact, pregnancy was often ruled out as well. Of course, any portrayal critical of the church was completely forbidden. This went to ridiculous degrees. In one case, they cut the Pope from a newsreel because it showed him celebrating Mass, and they considered it blasphemous to have that on film. This censorship fell heavily on foreign films, but for locally made films, it often strangled them in the cradle. This resulted in a self-fulfilling prophecy that the only way to make it in films was to move to America. We've already discussed how leaders of the artistic film scene like Mary Manning and Dennis Johnson moved to America in the 1930s to escape the oppressive oversight of the church and state. But in addition, actors like Sarah Allgood, who had mentored Mary Manning, and Barry Fitzgerald, who we'll discuss later, all moved to America around this time. This left a gap in the market, and the Catholic Church themselves were swift to step into the void. In 1943, the National Film Institute was formed, under the direct supervision of Archbishop Charles McCaid. McCaid was the Archbishop of Dublin and the head of the church in Ireland, which gave him a level of power above that of the government on occasion. Initially, the Institute distributed approved educational films to be shown in cinemas and community halls, but they moved into making their own films after the war. This included, in 1948, filming the GAA's All-Ireland hurling and Gaelic football finals. This is sometimes claimed to be the first ever filming of the All-Ireland finals, but that's not really true. There had been films about the sport before, most notably a 1936 MGM short called simply Hurling, and Pathé had made newsreels about the finals before as well. It's possible this is the first time the full finals were recorded, but it was a reel of highlights that were sent around for the whole country to watch. Still a major step in the elevation of the two sports within Irish culture. The NFI's involvement helped to cement its position as the purveyor of acceptable film materials. They were the main provider of educational film for use in classrooms for decades to come, although in the 1980s the organisation secularised and renamed itself the Irish Film Institute to show its independence from its roots. Nowadays it's become the main film archive of Ireland, as well as promoting film culture to the public in general and to schools in particular. One of the first feature films shot in Ireland after the war was I See a Dark Stranger, released in 1946. The film was written by Sidney Gilliat and Frank Launder, two Englishmen who had cut their teeth writing for Alfred Hitchcock. For this film, Launder stepped into the director's chair. The film's protagonist is Bridie Keelty, played by the Scottish actress Deborah Kerr. She is a young woman raised in her father's tale of the Irish Revolution and determined to strike her own blow against perfidious Albion. Since it's set in 1944, this means she is recruited by a German spy. The film thinks they have free reign throughout Ireland. As we know from earlier episodes, this was decidedly not the case. The story shows the clear influence of Hitchcock. She gets caught up with a British agent, follows a trail of German hints to discover the secret date of the D-Day landings, and eventually decides not to reveal it to the Nazis. Good for her, I suppose. She does wind up marrying the English agent, though. Film was shot on location in Dublin and the surrounding area, as well as on the Isle of Man and in England. The one piece where they seem to have shot elsewhere is the finale, which takes place on the border between the Republic and the North. Film was not a huge success, but it did mark a reawakened interest in Ireland as a filming location. Around the same time, for example, exteriors were shot in Wicklow for the Daphne du Maurier film Hungry Hill. But my personal favourite film shot in Ireland that decade is Odd Man Out, filmed in Belfast in 1946 and released in January 1947. If you're a fan of early Irish cinema, you may recognise quite a few familiar faces in the cast of Odd Man Out. This is because, with the exception of its leading man, they were mainly recruited from our old friends, the players of the Abbey Theatre. The lead was James Mason, who would go on to become a star on both sides of the Atlantic. This is often considered his breakout role. It's also sometimes considered the best film from the director, Carol Reed. High praise when you consider that his other credits include both The Third Man and Oliver. In fact, Odd Man Out was the first ever winner of the BAFTA for Best British Film. The film was based on a novel by Frederick Lawrence Green, who did actually live in Belfast. This may be why the fabric of the city feels so authentic in the film. The story begins, as so many noir stories do, with a heist gone wrong. The heist is led by Johnny McQueen, played by James Mason. He is an IRA member on the run after a prison break, though the movie never actually says IRA, just the organisation. He and his gang rob a mill for funds. The robbery is a success, but Johnny is shot and separated from his gang. Most of the rest of the film follows Johnny as he tries to make his way through the bleak winter across Belfast, encountering a variety of different characters who either help or hinder him. I won't spoil the details of the story, but it ends in a memorable confrontation at the Belfast docks, with the snow falling hard under the gaze of the Albert clock. One scene in the film has Johnny stagger into a bar, close to passing out from blood loss. A sympathetic barman deposits him in a snug until he can get someone to take him away. The bar is modelled after the Crown, one of Belfast's most distinctive pubs. It was originally known as the Railway Tavern when it opened in 1826, since it was across the road from one of Belfast's largest railway stations. In 1885, it was operating as a gin saloon when it was remodelled and renamed by Patrick Flanagan. There's an urban legend about the name, that it was chosen by his wife, who was a Protestant. In the story, Patrick, who was a Catholic, put the crown on the entranceway as a mosaic so it would be stood on by any visitors. I don't know if the story's true, but the mosaic of the crown is there. It's part of what made the bar so distinct, its decor. At the time, there was a group of Italian craftsmen in Belfast working on various churches in the city. Flanagan persuaded them to work on the bar in the evenings, so it was decorated in stained glass splendour. It was this unique decor that made Carol Reed want to film there, although since he couldn't fit the equipment into the bar, the scenes were actually filmed on a replica set. In 1978, the bar was bought by the National Trust, who spent £400,000 on refurbishing it. Among other things, they bought the replica set from the film and used it to replace parts of the bar, meaning that film fans who go there do actually get to see what was in the film. The National Trust still own the place. and lease it out to be operated as a working pub. Odd Man Out was a success both in the box office and with the critics, made James Mason a star, and established Carol Reed as a master of noir filmmaking. In 1949 he made his other masterpiece, The Third Man, starring an actor with a unique relationship with Ireland, Orson Welles. Orson had gotten his first acting role on stage in the Gate Theatre in Dublin at the age of 16 by walking in and declaring that he was a Broadway star. Hilton Edwards, the manager, didn't believe the young man, but he admired his confidence and cast him in a supporting role. Orson was on a tour around Ireland at the time that had included a trip out to the Aran Islands, perhaps inspired by Man of Aran. He appeared in a few more productions at the Gate and one at the Abbey Theatre before moving on to London and then back to America. By 1949, he was one of the best-known actors in the world, and he was able to use his earnings to fund his own passion projects. One of those was a version of Othello, which he filmed in Italy. He was still friends with Hilton Edwards, and he cast Edwards in the film. He also cast Edwards' long-time romantic partner, Micheál Mac Liammar, as Iago. Micheál is an amazing character, and he will get his own episode one day, I promise. Filming took several years to complete, with Welles taking other jobs whenever he ran out of money before returning to the filming. During one of these breaks, in 1951, he went on holiday to Ireland with Edwards and Mac Liammar. While he was there, he appeared in a short film called Return to Glenaskell, written and directed by Hilton Edwards. Stars Orson Welles as himself, driving towards Dublin late at night. He passes a man with a broken-down car and stops to check on him. The man is played by Michael Lawrence, an Irish actor who was also part of the Othello cast. He tells Orson the story of how he coincidentally gave a lift to two women from the exact same crossroads a year earlier, and the events that followed. It's an atmospheric and spooky story, although it's only 23 minutes long. It was nominated for an Oscar for Best Short in 1954, though it lost out to a Disney nature film about bears. At the same time as Orson Welles was making his Irish ghost story, another Hollywood star was making a very different kind of movie at the other end of the country. Nearly 20 years earlier, in 1933, the Irish-American film director John Ford had read a short story set in his parents' homeland. It was by the writer Maurice Walsh, and it was called The Quiet Man. Ford liked the story well enough to buy the rights to an option on filming it from Walsh. At the time, Ford was an industrious up-and-coming film director, despite the Great Depression impacting the movie industry. He made several movies set in Ireland during this decade. We've mentioned his Oscar-winning movie The Informer in a previous episode, but he also made a movie version of Sean O'Casey's play The Plough in the Stars, set in the months before the Easter Rising. For that, he brought a large number of the original cast of the play over from Ireland, though RKO insisted on casting Hollywood stars as the male and female lead. By the end of the 1930s, he was one of the highest paid directors in Hollywood, and by the 1950s, he was a legend. He had also created another legend in his wake, the actor John Wayne, whose career had been built by Ford. When he finally decided to make his passion project, he cast Wayne in the lead, alongside the Irish actress Maureen O'Hara. She was born as Maureen Fitzsimmons in Dublin in 1920, and her acting talent was clear from an early age. At 14, she was training in the Abbey Theatre, and that was where the actor Charles Laughton saw her performing in 1937. He got her a role in the Alfred Hitchcock movie Jamaica Inn, and was also the one who advised her to change to a more obviously Irish surname. In 1939, she moved to Hollywood to play the female lead opposite Laughton in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. As the film released, World War II broke out, meaning that a return to the London studios was impossible, and she decided to stay in Hollywood. It was in 1941 that she was first cast in one of John Ford's movies, a story about a Welsh mining family called How Green Was My Valley. The film won 5 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director. Maureen didn't win an Oscar, but she did get a position in Ford's stable of regulars. This greatly boosted her career. By 1951, she was a major Hollywood star as well. The trio of her, Wayne and Ford had almost enough star power to get Republic Pictures to agree to finance the film. But they needed one more thing, and they took advantage of Ford's desire to shoot a major motion picture in the west of Ireland to get it. At the time, Ford was bored of making westerns, but the heads at Republic knew that the combination of him and Wayne in a western was a guaranteed profit that would offset the loss they expected from his Irish film. So they persuaded him to make the movie Rio Grande with Wayne and O'Hara in 1950, before he set out to Ireland. They were right in that Rio Grande did make a healthy profit, but they were also wrong, because it was dwarfed by the success of The Quiet Man. Filming began in the summer of 1951, on location in the west of Ireland. Ford's father came from Spiddal in County Galway, and most of the filming took place in that area. The primary location used was the village of Cong, which some of you might remember as the last retreat of Oscar Wilde's father after his own scandalous court case. Unsurprisingly, it's the association with The Quiet Man that they lean on more for tourism. The building used as a pub in the film was a shop back then, but is a pub now, with regular showings of the film. In fact, tourism inspired by the film has been a major contributor to the success of the town, which is thriving nowadays. It's well deserved. The film makes the fictional village of Innisfree look absolutely amazing. Ford wanted to create an ideal Ireland, one untroubled by political strife and personifying the rural ideals that he believed in. Into this community arrives John Wayne, playing Sean Thornton. Trooper, as he is nicknamed, was born in Innisfree but taken to America as a baby when his parents emigrated. Having retired from a successful boxing career, he has come to the village to buy his old family farm back. He does so, but in the process angers local squire Red Danaher, who wanted to buy it for himself. Red is played by Victor McLaughlin, another Ford regular. This is inconvenient for Sean, as he falls in love with Red's sister Mary Kate, played of course by Maureen O'Hara. The locals are on Sean's side and trick Red into giving his permission for the marriage, but when he discovers the trick, he refuses to pay Mary Kate's dowry. This leads to strife between the new couple, made worse by Sean's refusal to fight Red. He retired from boxing after killing a man in the ring, and he swore off fighting. The ending of the movie is famous for a long scene where Sean finally breaks this vow and engages in a fist fight throughout the length of the village with Red. This dispels the tension between the men and allows for harmony to return to the town. Ford was conscious of his own detachment from Irish culture, so he decided he needed an advisor to help him avoid offending people. The man he hired was Ernie O'Malley, a veteran of the Irish War of Independence who had become second in command of the IRA during the Irish Civil War. Held prisoner after the war, he was elected to the Dáil despite his own wishes, and he refused to serve after he was released. In the 1930s, he wrote a 2-part memoir about each of the wars, although his book about the Civil War, The Singing Flame, would not be published until 1978, decades after his death. Around the time he was helping Ford with The Quiet Man, he was also interviewing other former IRA members to gain additional insight in the Civil War. As well as going into The Singing Flame, these also formed the basis of his biography of Ciaran Conliffe, another IRA leader who died in 1921. This book was also not published until long after Ernie's death. Just as anyone except the leadership at Republic Pictures could have predicted, The Quiet Man was a huge success. The critics lapped it up, and it earned nearly $4 million at the box office in its first year, enough to put it in the top 10 highest earners for 1952. It also won Ford his 4th Best Director Oscar, as well as winning an Oscar for cinematography thanks to its beautiful Irish exteriors. Sadly, it did not set off a new rush of American directors to film in Ireland, but Ford himself did return to Ireland twice more to make movies. The first of them was The Rising of the Moon. This film is unusual in several different ways. Ford took no salary for making it, for starters. He seems to have made it just because he wanted to make another movie in Ireland at the twilight of his career. It's filmed in black and white, which was not unusual at the time but was surprising for a director as big as Ford. There are no big-name actors, though there would be a lot of familiar faces for any fans of Irish cinema. Like many before him, Ford had drawn on the stars of the Irish stage to populate his screen, and it's an anthology movie, based on a short story and 2 plays. The short story is by Frank O'Connor, one of the most prolific Irish writers of the 20th century. We've run into a film based on his work before, Guests of the Nation, which Mary Manning adapted and Dennis Johnson directed. The story here, The Majesty of the Law, is lighter fare. It's about a policeman who is forced to arrest an old friend named Dan O'Flaherty for hitting someone. Dan feels he did nothing wrong, so he refuses to pay the fine or even allow the person he struck to pay it for him. The second is based on a play by Martin McHugh called A Minute's Wait. It's a comedy set in a train station as passengers wait for their delayed train to resume its journey. The last part is also based on a play, this time by Lady Gregory. The film takes its name from that play, The Rising of the Moon, and the play took the name from a popular Irish ballad about the United Irishmen's rebellion. The play is set in 1921 and is about the escape from death row of an Irish nationalist hero, the game of cat and mouse between him and a police sergeant with divided loyalties. It's an interesting counterpoint to the lighter tone of the first two parts, almost as if they are appetizers to this main course. The cast list of the film is basically a who's who of Irish theatrical actors of the era, including several who have appeared in probably over half the films we've discussed in this series. The Rising of the Moon was the last film Ford completed in Ireland, though he did have another attempt at it in 1965. This was another unusual film, a biopic about the Irish playwright Sean O'Casey. In the film, O'Casey's name is changed to Cassidy, despite O'Casey himself having given the OK to the script. This might be because Cassidy in the film bears little relationship to O'Casey, and the events of the film bear only the slightest resemblance to reality. Cassidy is played by Rod Taylor, an Australian actor best known for turning down the role of James Bond when it was offered to him. Ironically, he only got his role in this film because Sean Connery had scheduling conflicts with his work on Goldfinger. The film is set in 1911, and as Cassidy is a labourer who finds a talent for writing and inspiring rebellion in his fellow countrymen. He submits his play to the Abbey Theatre, where W.B. Yeats rejects his first play, The Shadow of a Gunman, but accepts his second, The Plough in the Stars. You might remember that Ford had already made a movie of that one. The play is a success, but sparks riots that mark Cassidy out as the new voice of the revolution. There are a lot of issues with the historical accuracy of the story I just told you. For starters, O'Casey didn't begin writing plays until 1917 or so, and he was a good deal older at the time than was shown in the film. In fact, at the time the film begins, he was involved in socialism, not writing, something the film unsurprisingly downplays for the American audience. The Shadow of a Gunman was not rejected by the Abbey Theatre, and it was actually O'Casey's first accepted play. He didn't follow it up with The Plough in the Stars. He wrote Juno and the Paycock, and then he wrote The Plough in the Stars. While there were riots after the fourth performance of The Plough in the Stars, it wasn't because of patriotic fervour. It was because the audience thought that O'Casey was not patriotic enough, and that he was being disrespectful to the martyrs of the Easter Rising. I don't know how much to blame John Ford for that, though. He became ill about 3 weeks into filming and was replaced by Jack Cardiff. The poster for the film still featured John Ford's name front and centre, of course, but I don't think it helped the box office much. The poster also features Rod Taylor with his shirt off, and that probably speaks more to the level of the film. Ford never made another Irish film, and in fact made only one more film before his death in 1973. That's the end of this episode, but we're not done with the history of Irish film quite yet. Next week, we'll turn the clock back to the 1950s. That's because, as much as I would like to, I don't think I can get out of this series without covering a movie that has become practically a swear word among serious Irish film buffs. Next episode, it's time to talk about Darby O'Gill and the Little People. This has been Wild Old Times, a podcast about the stranger corners of Ireland and Irish history. The opening theme is The Cat That Ate the Candle. The closing theme is The Parting Glass. Both were recorded by Gregory Mahan and are used under a Creative Commons license. You can find more of Greg's music at tinwhistler.com. Our logo is by Liffy Designs. Wild Old Times is recorded at Farset Labs in Belfast. If you enjoyed the podcast, give it a review wherever you find it. It really does help the show. If you really enjoyed it, tell your friends. Either way, I hope to see you again for another wild old time from Irish history.